Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
The Rev and the Rabbi. Entertaining and informative. On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Good morning. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I don't want to start on a sad note, but this past week I attended a funeral which received a lot of attention in the news. A friend of mine, Rabbi Shlomo Nisanoff, and his wife were vacationing in Florida with their children. And one child tragically was killed on the jet ski. The other child is in critical condition in a Florida hospital. And I went to the funeral service. They are Bukharian, so, certain Bukharian traditions were followed. I have to say that a few things went through my mind. Firstly, a reporter came over to me as I was walking to the service and said, "What will you say?" And I looked at him and I said, "Sir, this is a moment when you say as little as possible, but you do as much as possible. You hold, you hug, you embrace in any way you can. You also see what the family needs. And if you, Rev, you and I have spoken about the theology of presence, the fact that you're here, the fact that you're here to say, I want to help. We love you and want to help you. That's what matters most. But theologically, it's very hard to accept."
Well, I think even the most devout believers have to admit that death remains shrouded in mystery for us, because it's faith, and faith by its nature is about trusting. It doesn't mean full comprehension. So even in the Christian faith, where the resurrection is foundational to our belief system, Christ rising from the dead, but still, it doesn't remove the fact that to us, faith is still a mystery. It takes away for us in our belief, in our tradition, the fear of death in terms of what happens after, but it does not remove that mystery. And why this person and not the other person?
Yeah. And there comes a point in life where logic ends, and I think you need as much faith as possible. And I would talk to some of the people there, and they were saying, well, what's the message here for us? And I know some people think, well, if this is God's way of reminding us that we have to do more, we have to look inward. Someone even said that, which I don't understand at all, how we're taking a child away somehow is a message for all of us.
Message from God personally, that God is personally involved in that. Yeah. We have to be careful when we try to make sense of tragedy, and we bring in God's participation in any way, as a conspirator or as someone who's there to redeem it. I think death in and of itself reminds us of the brevity of life. It reminds us that life is a mystery. It reminds us that we never know just how much time we have on this planet. Therefore, we have a responsibility to make the most of the time that we do have. For me, that comes from death itself, not necessarily from God sending me a message, especially taking a young life.
Exactly. When it's a young child, it is something that is beyond comprehension. But to say that God wants, to be surrounded by young, good people, none of that makes sense. And none of that is comforting. As a matter of fact, to me, it's even insulting. Because people at that moment cannot accept a God that willfully wants young people to be taken from this world. It's unfortunate. As Harold Kushner said, we live in a very imperfect world where there are tragedies, and we have to do as much as we can to prevent those tragedies. That's a message for us, that when things do happen, we have to ask, what more could we do to prevent these things? But to say that somehow we have to look as to who we are within ourselves, it's a message from God to us, that I don't think is acceptable.
But let me ask you a question. With or without religious affiliation, faith is foundational for life. We may not ascribe it to a set of beliefs, ritual, and practices to a deity, but every day we act in faith in some way, believing that the best in human beings are going to present themselves throughout our day, believing in the social contract that if I'm walking down the street with you, you're going to treat me with respect and honor, and I'm going to treat you with dignity. Believing that the future holds something better for us, so therefore we continue to strive and move forward. We all live in some way as an act of faith on a daily basis. Religion takes it to the place of transcendence.
But believing even when it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
Right? Because you say, how could God do this? How could God take away a young child? And being able to say, I don't have an answer, but I still believe in God.
That's important. What you just said is important. Even as clergy, we must be careful that we don't become the answer man or the answer woman, whatever it may be. And that's another problem in today's language, world of language. But we should be able to say, I don't have an answer. I'm here for you. I'm sure that in Catholic theology, it says that there is some greater good, something fruitful that will come out of this tragedy. And when we give time, we look back. I've shared with it on the air with you, the loss of my son, our firstborn son. And here it is, his 3 boys. My wife and I took them in, and we raised them from teenagers into young men who are doing very, very well for themselves right now.
I remember that memorial service for you, and when I was at this one, I thought, look at how everyone here wants to do something more for the family, wants to be a support system for this family. It elevates us in that sense. Unfortunately, it's a tragic situation to get some people to think of that. But no matter where you are in life, you need people, you need community. You can't go through it alone. My father and mother who were in the concentration camps, part of the reason they fell for their survival was they were surrounded by people who said, we're going to get through this together somehow.
That's faith.
Right?
They believe.
That's faith.
That's faith.
And the belief in tomorrow.
Yeah.
That today it is horrific, it's painful, but there's going to be a tomorrow. We have an interesting tradition in Jewish world where when someone dies, we cut the clothing. We make a tear in the clothing, and we recite a blessing. And when we recite that blessing, we say, blessed is God, the judge of truth. What we're really saying is we don't understand. We know that God represents truth, and we offer a blessing even when the heart is torn, which is a hard thing to do. So I spoke to good friends of the family today. By the way, the burial was in Israel. And I called friends of the family and I said, just let us know what more we can do. We don't have the luxury of saying we're not going to do anything. What more can we do? So it's a difficult time, but...
Isn't faith also embracing the fact that we know in part, that our knowledge is partial in every and anything in this world in which we live? And where knowledge leaves off or finds its deficiency, faith takes over, right? Even in the realm of science, which is an empirical study, all right? These scientists will research and experiment because they believe that somewhere along the line they're going to break through when it comes to understanding some subject matter.
There's that well-known quotation that the world breaks everyone, but some people remain strong in the broken places. And I think that when you have faith, that gives you the strength that you didn't think you had, and allows you to get through this. Nevertheless, I'm suffering today, but nevertheless, I'm determined to be here tomorrow for myself and certainly for others who depend on me. So it was one of those moments that you can't remove from your mind, nor should you. And I hugged the father and told him how much he meant to all of us. And he looked around, and so many people were there that he had touched. And that's another statement. You're there for others, and then there's a moment where others are there for you, too.
Yeah.
So be part of community. No matter where you are in that religious spectrum, be a part of a community. Rev, we're going to come back and talk about a number of other things. We also have a guest later on, Jonathan Wachtel, Global Affairs Analyst, because there's a lot going on in the world. But I thought we should spend some time talking about things that impact people every day in their own lives. We look at the globe, that's elsewhere. But what about right here?
Well, I want to ask you, I know we're going to close out this segment, but the whole idea of sitting shiva, what does that mean?
Okay, good. We will come back with more
Of the Rev and the Rabbi.
The Rev and the Rabbi on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Rev and the Rabbi. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joe Spatasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
We're talking about a painful subject, but a necessary subject, because somebody once said that life is so difficult that nobody gets out of it alive. So
that's true,
right?
It's an inevitability that we often don't want to think about unless we have to, and yet we should explore that. We should know before we're faced with a situation, loss of a loved one. You have a tradition, sitting shiva, and we talk about. I mean, it's not like everyone sits there in conversation, right?
So shiva means 7 because there are 7 days of mourning, excluding the Sabbath. But Saturday night you do sit 7 days. And what is it about? And I would use this rationale for it. I remember at a funeral, we're at the burial where people participate. That's another communal obligation. When a person is buried, the community comes together and participates in the burial. You don't leave it to outsiders unless it's absolutely necessary, but you leave it to people who knew this individual. It's a community saying, you lived with us, now that you're leaving us, we have to bury you. Mm-hmm. And a young boy came over, must have been about 15 or 16 years old. He said, Rabbi, I know why we take the shovels. He said, I thought about it. He said, when you come into this world, there should be loving hands around you, but when you leave this world, there should be loving hands around you. And I said, that's brilliant. That's simply brilliant. And I think there once again, what are we going to do for the family now? And that's what shiva is. It's a chance for a community to come together. By the way, community arranges the food. You're not allowed to do the cooking, preparing.
No, really?
It's a communal responsibility. And when you walk into a house of shiva, it's not one of those, it's not a celebratory moment. Of course, you reflect on someone's life and all the many good things, but it's a time for you to talk to the grieving family and talk about what this individual meant to you, recollections. Mm-hmm. So you're surrounded by people who care about you. My mother used to say that the most painful part of the shiva is the end of it, because here you had everybody around you, everybody came out, and now people are going back to their respective, places of work and what other obligations they have, and you're alone.
Yeah.
So the day after the shiva ends is a very difficult one, but you also get to recognize, I'm not alone in this world. I'm gonna get through it because of people who care. And community, that's why prayers are written in the plural. When you look at Jewish tradition, I'm sure Christian tradition.
The very famous Our Father. It begins and continues with that language. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come. Give us this day our daily bread. So it speaks collectively.
Yeah, and the same thing is true when you go through the liturgy of Jewish tradition. It is written in the plural. The word life, chayim, as I've often said, is written in the plural. You can't write life in the singular. You don't have the luxury of living life. You shouldn't have the luxury of living in this reclusive fashion where you're not connected to other people. A minyan, counting, with a quorum, is because you're there to recite prayers, and you have to look around and say, once again, it's the community that's here with me, and I'm here for the community. That's why I think some people realize too late that you can't make it alone. They say, I don't need anybody. I'm an independent. I'm autonomous. I'm independent. And then, God forbid, some crisis arises, and they say, wait a minute, I can't go through this.
Well, that's a problem. We, as human beings, we desire to love and to be loved. You can't do that by yourself. You have to have an object of affection. You have to be in relationship with someone in order to experience that. So this whole idea of flying solo is not going to work. But let me ask you a question.
Wait a minute. I met some people who love themselves so much they can't love anybody else. They're so consumed with self-love, there's no room for anybody else.
But even with that, people like that need someone to praise them, someone to give them accolades, someone to affirm them.
Someone to fight with.
Exactly. It's just, that's reality. But think about this also, because, your tone today is quite solemn because of what you experienced. Right. The impact that these things have on clergy. We dedicate children, as babies. Then there's the bar mitzvah for you. There's the confession and communion for us, and confirmation in the Catholic tradition as well. And we have our own tradition as Protestants. But we see death. And you remember, we think back at 9/11 and the work that we did as clergy on the front line. That was dealing with a lot of death. And then it comes around again with COVID-19. And we had to do funerals in the oddest of ways. That impacts the clergy person over time.
I remember being at the site, the September 11th memorial site. We saw all of that devastation. And it coincided with Rosh Hashanah, the new year. So he had conclusion of life, and you're talking about Rosh Hashanah, the commencement of life. And we sounded the shofar, the clarion call to say, you have to be strong and we look ahead to a new year. We did that at ground zero. I said, wow, look at that contradiction.
Yeah.
Here it's over and here it's beginning. But haven't we gone from a funeral to a naming ceremony of a child? Mm-hmm. We've done that. There is this cycle of life that you have to be able to somehow, I don't know if the word is compartmentalize, but you have to be able to say, let me treasure this moment. I walked out of the funeral for this young child, and the first thing I did was call my son. I said, all right, when are we having dinner? Yeah. When are we getting together this week? Yeah. The affirmation of life. We have to do something. Right. And there's an appreciation that while you're here, do as much as you can with those who mean so much to you, because we take them for granted.
Yeah, yeah.
Which leads me to my next issue with you. Next question.
You got another issue with me?
Well, because don't we often say,
oh, you mean the next issue to talk about?
Next issue to talk about, right.
Issues with me personally.
No. We say next time, right? Next time, I'm going to go on this vacation. Next time, I'm going to read this book. And next time very often means no time.
What are we pointing to? Leisure? Are we talking about escaping?
We plan
vacation, taking time off?
We're going to do all these things, but it's going to be next time, because right now I'm busy. Mm-hmm. Right now I have all these things to take care of. I'm too busy. Someone would say to me, I know why rabbis don't go on vacation. I said, why? He said, because they don't want them to learn that the synagogue can run just as well without them as with them. That's true of clergy. I said, you wonder sometimes. But those two words are so dangerous. Next time, when I get to it, I'll get to it next time.
It's our tendency to procrastinate. It's our tendency to allow things that seem urgent but not as important when weighed against the greater values in life. I don't think of anyone on their deathbed thinking that they should have spent more time at the office.
Yeah.
I think they're thinking about their family, what they could have done. We have the whole term bucket list, And
instead of next time, what do we hear? If only.
If only, yeah.
Right? And then too late.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, we really, I'm glad we had this discussion, as painful as it was, because it's a teaching moment for us.
Yeah.
It's a teaching moment for us to realize that treasure what you have while you have it, and who you have while you have them. And your own life, you always tell me there's an expiration date on everything, right?
Everything, that's right.
So
that's right.
We have to maximize. Don't live it with the minimum, live with the maximum.
And also accepting certain realities of life. I teach our congregation for decades that life is both threat and promise. Mm-hmm. Opportunity with opposition. Opposition with opportunity. And once we embrace that and accept that, we'll make the best of the promises and we will confront the threats differently because we know there's hope beyond that.
We're going to conclude now. I was just thinking, do you remember in the famous Broadway show Chorus Line?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Kiss today goodbye and point me to tomorrow. I would correct that. Don't kiss today goodbye. Hold on to today as long as you can, and then look forward to tomorrow.
Amen to that.
All right. That's your next sermon.
That's a good way to end the segment here, Rabbi. So stay tuned for more of The Rev and the Rabbi. We'll be right back here on Red Apple Radio Network.
The Rev and the Rabbi on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Rev and the Rabbi. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we have one of our favorite guests on, and that is Jonathan Wachtel, Global Affairs Analyst, former U.S. diplomat, Senior Policy Advisor and Director of Communications at the United States Mission to the UN, worked with Ambassador Nikki Haley and her successor Kelly Craft. He's also covered wars in the former Yugoslavia, Sudan, Arab-Israel conflict, worked on civic diplomacy between the Soviet Union and the United States in the late 80s, founded the Moscow Bureau of Worldwide Television News, Associated Press TV today. So one thing I could say about Jonathan, Rev, is wherever he's been, there's been conflict. Now, I'm not holding you responsible for all those conflicts, but you certainly have covered quite a few conflicts. Jonathan, thanks.
I have.
Yeah. So let's talk. Obviously, there's a lot of attention being focused on this past week's summit meeting between Putin and Trump. Where do you see that going? If you could be a prognosticator.
Well, right now we're seeing war raging in an intensified way as Vladimir Putin tries to make it abundantly clear to President Zelensky of Ukraine, that you've got to compromise, dude. And that's the ugly thing that happens as talks get underway, hopefully to try to wind down the bloodshed and the killing that we've, all these atrocities we've had to witness on our TV screens and online since February of 2022 when Vladimir Putin invaded.
And what's the enduring interest for America here? Obviously, we're not. How are we impacted by the conflict?
In so many ways that it's hard to answer that question succinctly, but let me try to tackle one thing. There was a guy named Neville Chamberlain, nefarious guy just before the major outbreak of World War II, and conceding to essentially the Nazi regime, to Adolf Hitler, an autocrat and fascist, and thinking that he had ended all wars. And then ultimately we all know what unfolded as a result of a British diplomat. President Trump is facing a very difficult task of trying to figure out what to do with Vladimir Putin, who is an expansionist, who's a guy who really every day wakes up upset that he's not leading the Soviet Union. And though today he leads the Russian Federation, which is nearly twice the size of the United States of America, he wants more landmass and more control and sway under his belt and try to at least reconstitute as much of the Soviet Union as he can. And the territories that we're talking about in eastern Ukraine and down to the Black Sea and penetrating into the Black Sea through the Crimean Peninsula are hugely strategic to Russia and hugely strategic to Ukraine, which is the second largest European country. That's the scale of what we're talking about. and hugely important because you're talking about fossil fuel areas, industrial areas, and then with Crimea, you're talking about the Black Sea Fleet, where the Russian Navy is housed as its entry point into the Black Sea, and from the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Strait of Turkey into the Mediterranean Sea. So in terms of everything from economics, in terms of actual land mass, and in terms of military might, this contest, though we're looking at from over here across the other side of the Atlantic, it is hugely consequential. The other reason it's hugely consequential is that there's a guy named President Xi in China who's been watching how this conflict unfolds. He's very closely aligned with Vladimir Putin. And as he's watching this unfold and really paying close attention to the territorial gains that Vladimir Putin may win as a result of launching a war on his neighbor, he is very much going to be looking at Taiwan and trying to figure out, can I bite off a piece of Taiwan? What's the United States going to do? And the only thing between China, mainland China, and Taiwan really is the United States. So this is a really delicate balance that our president is engaging in here.
Do you think the relationship between China and Russia can be strained because the Silk Road, of course, goes right through these areas that Putin has his eyes on, because he's not looking, I would say, more than reconstituting a Soviet Union. He wants a new Russian empire. He made that clear when he took control after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Will there be a tension between this ally or partner of his?
We have had a history of tension, though we were, quote unquote, allies during World War II. And ironically, the deal and that photograph that's indelibly marked in all our brains, and I hope a lot of the younger listeners to this program, Yalta, where you have that iconic picture of Stalin with Roosevelt and Churchill, takes place in Crimea, for heaven's sakes. And the consequences of what we're talking about, the enormity of it all matters very much. Now, in terms of the question that you have, it could lead to perhaps a warming of relations between the United States and Russia, but who are we warming up with? And what does this say about our relationship with countries such as Ukraine or the Republic of Georgia, another former Soviet republic that has had to deal with the ire of Vladimir Putin, or the expansionist intentions of Vladimir Putin? What does it say to our allies? Are we going to stand on principle and defend nations that have broken away from Moscow's control and are trying as best as they can to be democracies, liberal democracies? What is that? What messages are we giving? It would be one thing if the Russian Federation were this giant democracy, but it is a democracy, but an autocratic democracy.
Right.
So it's not us. It's not a mirror image of us.
Right.
So what leverage? I mean, I've seen many articles, stand strong, and you got to impose the harshest sanctions. What's the optimum for us? What does that mean, impose the harshest sanctions?
Well, I mean, there has been tough talk from President Trump that has really angered the Indians, who are a massive trading partner and talk about democracies, the largest democracy in the world in terms of population, the most populous nation in the world, and by nature of that, the largest democracy. And they feel that President Trump talking about slapping these additional sanctions on them because of their addiction to Russian oil, they're angry at us because they would say we're a sovereign power, and how can you dictate? Prime Minister Modi saying, why are you telling me what to do, Mr. President Trump? I lead the most populous nation on the earth, and we're strong and independent, and you can't dictate our foreign policy. So it's causing all sorts of geopolitical frictions as we try to figure out how we're going to put an end to this horrible war.
I want to make sure we have enough time because we may have to go into the other next segment to unpack this. But before we went into the segment, I mentioned to you a statement: history repeats itself. And I said history doesn't repeat itself, it adapts. And when we say history repeats itself, it means that, while there are certain patterns and motives and power dynamics that reappear time and time again because of human tendencies, ambition, fear, prejudice, desire for power. But it doesn't manifest itself the same way because other factors come into play, correct? So it's not a replication of the same thing. You are taking a look at history. You look at how it unfolds politically, socially. What's different about the history that we're making now from the past?
What's different about the history we're making now is there's the United States of America that is perceived around the world as in sensible places. Obviously, we're not beloved in many corners of the world, but sensible people look at the United States as this crowning democracy and something to look up to. And, history does matter. History matters even in the context of Ukraine. When Ukraine, and I was in Kiev when the president of Ukraine decided to do away with the nuclear arsenal. He had the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world on his territory. And he decided through a thing called the Budapest Agreement between the United States, Russia, and UK and France that the weapons would go back to the Russian Federation, and there would be guarantees given that Russia would never have any territorial claims on Ukraine, and everything would be copacetic. Now, we're talking about the early 90s with that agreement. Well, where, Reverend, are you talking about history? Are we going to abandon Ukraine when we agreed to this type of arrangement? What are we going to do about it? Hey, Alaska, where this summit has happened between President Trump and President Putin. Well, Alaska in the 1860s was purchased by the United States. And who did we buy it from? Russia.
Jonathan, can you hold that point? We've got to take a break, and when we come back, we want to continue this conversation because I also want to ask you about the pendulum in U.S. politics. So stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi. We'll be right back.
The Rev and the Rabbi on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Rev and the Rabbi. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joe Spatasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard. Sorry we had to interrupt that conversation, but Jonathan, continue. You talk a little bit about Alaska because we don't want to go too far down that road, but just wrap up what you were saying about Alaska.
We purchased Alaska for under $10 million. Why did we purchase it? Because Russia had lost a war in Crimea fighting the Ottoman Turks and the Brits and the French in this alliance, and actually Sicily of all things, and lost, and they had huge debt, and they had to sell this vast territory, Alaska. It's huge. Well, where does history begin and end? Russia their empire used to stretch into California. Does that mean that portions of California all the way up Oregon, Washington, up into Canada and Alaska, that actually belongs in part to Russia? Where does it all begin and end?
That's a very good point, and that's a whole show right there, reclaiming. Rabbi?
No, I want to talk to you about, we often hear of the word compromise, although less frequently now than ever before because people see compromise as a statement of weakness. So you have parties here who both want land. Ukraine wants all the land that was lost, we want that returned. We want to hold on to as much land as possible. Putin wants to get as much land as possible. Does compromise play a role here, and where are we in trying to get compromise?
Power is absolutely everything, and you have to know your power. If you're a country and a leader of a country, you have to know your power. If you're an autocrat, you know how to wield it in such a way that you exact pain on your own population and your neighbors and freak them out. If you're the United States, if we are to be that shining beacon on the hill, we need to use our power to our fullest. Vladimir Putin is using his power to crush Ukraine. He is militarized, sent in the military and is pulverizing Ukrainian forces right now on the eastern flank. And it is hell there. And it's going to be hell for some time until finally Vladimir Putin, through power, can force the Ukrainians to agree on terms that Vladimir Putin wants to have. Well, the United States has a lot of power. We do. This is why the European nations are so tripping over themselves, worried about what President Trump is doing in every move and freaked out about things, because it's the United States of America. Our military is bigger and stronger than the entire European Union put together. It is the force. So we are what is a deterrence to Vladimir Putin to push too far. We have that might. We've had that might. We've been able to contain Vladimir Putin by providing the Ukrainians with weapons. Russia would probably be in full, if not the majority possession. Right now they have a fifth of Ukrainian land under seizure. They would have a lot more if the United States had not intervened and said, hey, stop it, buddy. Well, we need to make sure that we are exacting pressure to make sure that concessions are really taken seriously and embraced by Moscow as much as possible, so that we can end up with a situation in which this conflict, which very much could flare up again if we don't give any security guarantees, or the security guarantees are not there to protect those other areas of Ukraine in which there's this back and forth fighting going on. Who's to say that in 3 years' time, Vladimir Putin's going to not wake up and think, hey, I think I want that territory.
Yeah,
and
that's
bingo. Back we are in this horror show.
Yeah. History shows that when one extreme dominates, political momentum often swings hard in the opposite direction, right? The pendulum in U.S. politics, American politics tends to oscillate between left-leaning and right-leaning governance. But it's not perfect. It's not a perfect back and forth, if I may say. Each shift tends to be shaped by specific grievances, cultural mood, economic conditions of the moment, etc. Do you think, and I'm in our faith tradition, we call it indulging the prophetic imagination. Some call it looking into the crystal ball. So, Jonathan, I need you to look into your crystal ball. Do you think some of the Trump era extremes will become a catalyst for a swing in the other direction?
I certainly hope so. If we're talking about the Russian Federation under Vladimir Putin's leadership, however, we're talking about a guy who has run the show, even though there was a short interlude in his career as president of Russia, but when Medvedev took over, but he was, Vladimir Putin was the puppet master during those years. Vladimir Putin has essentially been in power since 2000. That's many presidents. That's many situations. That's arguably the richest guy in the world. No one really knows, but he's been sitting on top of Gazprom, and a third of Russia's wealth comes from fossil fuel sales. Vladimir Putin is one very well-connected, solid, clever KGB leader guy. And he reads the room, he reads people, he's trained in this. He's read many presidents, including our President George Bush, who looked in his eyes and was charmed by Vladimir Putin. But Vladimir Putin looked at Bush's eyes, and who knows what he saw. And he's looked at every president and understood their frailties and had his machinery working on this and ensure that he remains in power, that he's a force, And he goes down in history as arguably the greatest Russian leader, the Tsar of the 21st century.
So matching Trump versus Putin, they know each other. They have a relationship. They're not strangers to each other. Do you think each one knows the other one's weaknesses and strengths as well?
If we put them in and they had I don't want to put this image in your mind, but it's kind of fun. If we threw them in to have a wrestling match, would
non-scripted,
non-scripted, right?
Yeah.
Would they know how to hurt each other and what to do to show this and that? Sure, I think they could size them up. The question is, how far does Vladimir Putin want to take this? Vladimir Putin's the guy who has geopolitical aspirations of taking over more territory. He wants the Soviet Union.
Right.
He's got a vision. Donald Trump doesn't have a vision of going back to the Cold War of this competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin lives and breathes that every single day.
That's a very, very good point. Let's bring it back stateside. All right. As we talk about potential shifts, and my question to you was will the extremes of Donald Trump's era, become a catalyst for shift? Because if the Democrats begin to appeal directly to disillusioned working class voters on economic security, infrastructure, healthcare, things like that, do you think that we can see a radical shift back in the other direction?
One thing that President Trump is, he's a disruptor. And certainly, the sands are shifting here. They really are. The important thing is to ensure that America is strong and looking after America. There's nothing wrong with that. But we also have to understand we live in a very interconnected world. And we began our conversation talking about the implications of what's happening in Ukraine and how they affect us. Well, they really do. They affect Europe. During World War II, there was an isolationist approach to the world that only empowered the Germans and the Japanese and the Italians to work together in their axis and inflict massive harm on the world, killing tens of millions of people as a result of that travesty. Well, you know what? We still are in a very dangerous world, arguably even more dangerous given the magnitude of the weapons of mass destruction that are available now in many countries. And, it's a different world we live in, and it's very complicated. We have a North Korea that now has multiple nuclear weapons, a guy as unhinged as you could possibly imagine, in control of that red button. That's the world we live in. And that guy happens to have a great relationship with Vladimir Putin and is providing troops and workers in Russia to help the economy and fight on the front lines against the Ukrainians. That's the world we live in.
Yeah. Right.
And we really have to tread carefully.
Yeah. We've come to the end of the program here. I just want to say this. One of the things I've learned in listening to you, learning from you, Jonathan, you can't understand a problem by living or reading the headlines. Some people only know the headlines. They don't know the details. And therefore, you bring us the details, the analysis, what this means for us, what it means for others. And that's why we value you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
It's always an honor.
Jonathan, always a pleasure having you on the program. Just not enough time. So we have to have you back. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, pleasure talking to you guys. At least we're not reading War and Peace. So we kind of are.
This is true. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us.
By the way, you just said not enough time. Don't you hope that is the epitaph for all of us that will say, we wish we had more time, right?
I think we all feel that way.
But at the end of our lives, we'll say, if only we had more time. That is a great, great statement. Thank you.
Sounds good. So, thank you for joining us on another episode of the dynamic duo, the Rev
and the Rabbi.
He's still late on this. Please forgive him. Till next time, God bless.
Thanks for listening to The Rev and the Rabbi. You can hear The Rev and the Rabbi Sunday mornings at 7. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?